When it comes to villains in media, the ones that really stick out to me are the unpredictable ones. You know the type. They're obviously bad guys, but their grand plan just always keeps you guessing. They're playing every side, pulling strings you didn't even realize were there, and no one does this better in Archie Sonic than Dr. Finitevus. His chaotic nature and twisted brilliance make him by far one of my favorite villains to emerge from the Archie Sonic universe, and today I'm going to be showing you why by going through the entirety of Dr. Finitevus. Our story would kick off with a green Knuckles, and honestly explaining why he's green would take an entire video on its own. So for the short version, he's been infused with a godlike amount of chaos energy, and it's starting to freak the echidnas out. So naturally they capture him and they attempt to suck out his power using a chaos siphon suit. This suit is based on the same tech that was accidentally used to create Enerjak. And, naturally, they think it's a good idea to use the suit that created a twisted evil god on Knuckles to siphon his chaos energy. Evidently, this plan was doomed to backfire from the start. So, understandably, things end up going wrong, and Knuckles is in serious pain, and that's when Charmy and his girlfriend Saffron spot him. They end up swooping in to the rescue, and in doing so, they cut the process short, but not before leaving a poor, unnamed echidna, who was responsible for the machine, completely burned out and on the ground in really rough shape. We would much later find out that the echidna responsible for the Chaos Siphon suit was none other than the up-and-coming scientist named Dr. Finitevus. This doctor had initially designed the suit, and he was using it when he was trying to siphon Knuckles' powers. The aftermath of this failed experiment, however, left him almost completely albino except for his black eyes and a strange spiral-shaped mark on his forehead that almost looks like a third eye. It's kinda creepy. Now, the Doctor's intelligence, along with his own physical strength, remained intact, and in fact, they were only amplified by this power. However, we would soon learn that his mental state definitely did not survive this transformation. Unlike Knuckles, who at the time was overloaded with positive chaos energy, Finitevus was infused with a negative variant, which gave him the ability to manipulate a unique form of dark energy. Realizing that they had yet again accidentally created another dangerous entity, the echidnas decided to euthanize him, and spoiler alert, it didn't go well. Finitevus sabotaged the defenses, leaving them completely vulnerable to an attack by Eggman, and this caused the Echidna Society to swiftly be crippled. Eventually, Knuckles, Sonic, and the Chaotix would wind up on Angel Island to rescue Knuckles' father, Locke, and stop the Dark Legion, who are basically an evil Echidna cult. This all-out battle that they would have against the Dark Legion would be interrupted when a female Echidna would call for everyone to stop. This woman in question is none other than Knuckles' mom, and she's here with Knuckles' stepdad because understandably his mom wouldn't want to stay with a person who infused Knuckles with a godlike amount of chaos energy from birth. Knuckles' stepdad is a little bit weird though. He's literally on his knees worshipping Knuckles as the Avatar, and yeah, it's odd. Knuckles would learn that after Eggman's assault, the Dark Legion stepped in to protect the Echidnas from both Robotnik and the Echidnas' long-term rivals, the Dingoes. From here, Knuckles would just kind of follow his mom through a warp ring into the Hidden Palace Zone, and it's here where a group of Echidnas would be beyond excited to see their so-called Avatar. One of them is even holding up a sign reading "The Avatar Walks Among Us, Prophecy 33K 10/18/94. Now, aside from issue 94 being the issue where they tried to use a Chaos Siphon suit on Knuckles' green powers, I honestly can't figure out what this reference is supposed to mean. If anyone has any ideas here, feel free to let me know in the comments, because this is a head scratcher. While all of these excited echidnas are around, the gang also would meet Dr. Finitevus for the first time. He's here working for the Dark Legion, and nobody knows that he's largely responsible for the current state of the echidna people. Honestly, as he takes them to the Dark Legion's HQ, I'm left wondering why none of the echidnas have realized that their so-called protectors are completely evil. I mean, just look at everything around them, including the guys in cloaks who look honestly about as sinister as they can come. Once they're in the base, they would meet Commissar Linda. I think that's the way you say her name. I'm honestly not sure, and people in my last video kept telling me that it's not Linda. She is now in charge of the Dark Legion, and okay, listen, I get it now. Don't judge me, I'm easily swayed by a strong woman, but I could see why the Echidnas wanted to join the Dark Legion. There's some serious tension between her and Knuckles, though, and we will learn that Knuckles' dad isn't actually being held by the Dark Legion, but that he's been captured by the Dingoes, and that the Dark Legion are willing to work with him to get Locke back. Luckily, Finitevus has a double agent inside of the Dingoes' ranks who will help them get to Knuckles' father, Locke. While they're waiting, two echidnas named Palu and Marika approach Knuckles, asking for his help to heal their daughter who has lost her sight. They don't want the Dark Legion's help, which would involve giving her cybernetic implants, and at this point, it's pretty clear that Knuckles was written to be pretty much Jesus, and as weird as it sounds, this is a thing that happens a lot in Archie Sonic. And just like myself, honestly, Finitevus hates this whole chosen one idea and fully supports using technology over superstition. And like I said, I kind of agree with him on that. When you have a society that can literally give your daughter her sight back, I don't know why you would choose to take that instead of asking the so-called avatar that just appeared and honestly hasn't done any miracles just of yet. Anywho, Sonic and his friends, along with the Dark Legion, would team up to take on the Dingoes and rescue Locke. It turns out that the Dingoes are working with Eggman, and that to help them, Eggman has sent one of the most anime-looking men ever to help even the odds. Finitevus' main objection here would be to protect the Master Emerald and make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, and honestly the wrong hands to him are basically any hands that aren't his. This anime dude would end up having a spear that would teleport anyone that it hit into one of Eggman's egg grapes, which are basically just giant batteries that charge Eggman's city, and they use living beings to fuel them. And it's presumed here that Finitevus got hit by one off-screen. Of course, however, when something happens off-screen, it's pretty easy to assume that it didn't happen at all. Also not related to Dr. Finitevus, but honestly I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. This is also the comic where we'd see the memed pink Hyper Knuckles, and yeah, he still looks really goofy, but that's a story for another time. Fast forward into the future, and Sonic would find himself dealing with yet another evil version of himself. This time, it's Scourge, who is literally an evil version of Sonic from another universe. And heads up, I've got a full video on him like this one that's going to be dropping later this month, so stay tuned for that. For now though, all you need to know right now is that Scourge is working with Rouge, and the two of them are very outnumbered right now. While on the ropes, Scourge and Rouge make a run for it, and by what seems like just sheer luck, they stumble across a warp ring which leads them to none other than Dr. Finitevus. Finitevus, of course, has been planning to meet them from the very beginning, as he's an opportunist, and he presents them with a proposition. It's essentially a job that's going to be stirring up all kinds of chaos, and it's hard to see exactly what the end goal is, but instantly Scourge is in, and to me it's a little bit surprising that Rouge was also so ready to join up, but to be honest, she had just been rescued and it would be pretty hard to return right now, so it kind of makes sense. Together with a group of hired baddies known as the Destructics, Scourge and the gang would break into Eggman's egg grape facility where they would quote-unquote rescue the echidnas inside. And as we would see not much later, this wasn't so much a rescue as much as it was taking the echidnas and going off to someplace somehow worse than a life-sucking battery. Rouge would eventually also wisen up, and she would split away from the group after learning that Finitevus' plan here was that he wanted to launch a whole bunch of ancient missiles. Realizing that she is a jewel thief and not someone who wants to plunge the world into a nuclear winter, Rouge defuses them and prevents total annihilation before running off. These echidnas who were rescued did not fare very well at all under Dr. Finitevus. In fact, like I said, they weren't really rescued at all. They were used and then discarded by the Mad Doctor's experiments. Finitevus was especially interested in Knuckles' bloodline given how they could control the chaos power kind of easily, and those were the specific echidnas who he was after from inside of the egg grapes. And fortunately for him, just about every single echidna that we would ever meet is somehow related to Knuckles. However, he didn't really seem interested in having most of them alive. In fact, for his upcoming plan, it would probably be better if they weren't alive. Now, like I said, it's kind of worth mentioning that Knuckles' family tree includes over 50 echidnas that we met in the comics, which gave Finitevus plenty of subjects to experiment on. Once he was finished with them, he would just yeet them off into the Twilight Zone, which is basically the Archie equivalent of Yu-Gi-Oh! Shadow Dimension and not the same thing as the Twilight Zone TV show. It essentially means that these echidnas were dead. They were left floating around in some desolate space, which is honestly a terrifying end. We would also learn that Finitevus' goal while working with the Dark Legion was trying to shape Knuckles' cousin, Linda, for his own ends. However, he found her to be too headstrong to be a good pawn for him, which resulted in his departure when he faked his own capture. The only echidna here that he wouldn't finish off was Constable Remington, a distant relative of Knuckles because of course he is, and he intended to mold him into a completely subservient being by force. He would cybernetically alter Remington and wipe his mind in an attempt to create the perfect being. This might actually sound kind of similar to another Mad Doctor that we touched upon fairly recently in IDW and some subservient beings that he created with cybernetics. As I mentioned earlier, Finitevus loves to play all sides, and he would continue to do so as he would randomly appear to help those that you would least expect. Like, for example, when Eggman's cybernetic son Adam took over Tommy Turtle, which is honestly a whole other story. Feel free to check out my Not So Super Form video to see a full breakdown on that scenario. Finitevus would show up on Angel Island to help Locke. The two of them would work together using their powers to keep the Master Emerald safe from this cyborg symbiote turtle. At the end of the day, Finitevus ultimately will align with anyone as long as it serves his grand scheme. It's important to remember that while Finitevus is a villain, he isn't doing anarchy for the sake of anarchy, and he is presently placing all of the dominoes in their correct positions before knocking them over. Heck, this wasn't even the only time we'd see Finitevus help out on Angel Island. In their time of need, he would show up once again with the Destructics to save the Echidna people from invading dingoes. But as always, Finitevus has his own agenda here, and he's really there to try and further his plans. He would strike a deal with Locke, offering him the Warp Ring in order to go searching for the missing Guardians who were supposed to be protecting the Master Emerald, but surprise surprise have been missing ever since the attack by the anime boy during the Dingoes arc. Finitevus, along with Dimitri, who was the original Enerjak and then later became the leader of the Dark Legion, and then later on, even further down the line, had his body pretty much taken away from him by Finitevus, who promised to give him more power. Holy cow, that is a lot of information. Would keep an eye on the Master Emerald while Locke was gone. With no other option, Locke left to find his relatives, unaware that Finitevus had already finished them off and just wanted some alone time, some one-on-one with the Master Emerald. Oh, and so I guess I should give a little bit more description to Dimitri. Basically, after losing his Enerjak powers, Dimitri became a giant cyborg robot where it was really hard to tell where the robotics stopped and the Echidna began. And when Finitevus came to join the Dark Legion, he had struck a deal with Dimitri to make him stronger. However, what Finitevus really did was reduce him to nothing more than a head in a jar and promised to make him stronger, but it just never quite happened, and really the goal at the end of the day here was to make him weak and yet another subservient being with him. Although, Finitevus did promise he would bring Enerjak back once again, and this is a promise that he would keep, as we'll see. With the Master Emerald all to himself, Finitevus began tampering with it, infusing his own negative chaos energy and embedding it with strange hexes. This proved to be too much for Dimitri, who eventually decided to flee and defect. Now listen, when a guy like Dimitri, who has been hell-bent on world domination and was at one point possessed by one of the most evil incarnate gods, decides to defect from you, you may have gone too far. That should have been a massive red flag for Finitevus, but Finitevus honestly wasn't all that concerned, and he seemed pretty chill about all of this. He was confident that Enerjak's return was just around the corner, and it was clear that he didn't need Dimitri for that. Finitevus' allies were thinning out, but he still did have Scourge and the Destructic on his side. Using the Destructics, Finitevus orchestrated an ambush on Knuckles, having him jumped and then brutally beaten. Archimedes, the Fire Ant, who was a long-term friend and mentor of Knuckles, could only watch, hopelessly outnumbered and unable to intervene. Knuckles was then handed over to the Dark Legion, who brought him straight to the Master Emerald. At this point, the depths of Finitevus' deception began to unravel. Remington, who had become Finitevus' mind-wiped servant, was working for the Dark Legion under the belief that Finitevus had saved him and was doing everything possible to restore his mind. In truth, of course, Finitevus was the one who shattered it, molding Remington into a puppet that would serve his purposes. Though unfortunately for Finitevus, Remington just wasn't as connected with chaos energy as he wanted him to be, which led him to his next plan, and that was to go to the one that had the closest connection to chaos energy, which was Knuckles. So, he had Knuckles kidnapped and told Knuckles and the Dark Legion that 90% of their people had been destroyed by Dr. Eggman. This lie is how Finitevus convinced the Dark Legion to align with him, and he left out the part where he had just been discarding all of the Echidna bodies into space himself, and it wasn't quite Eggman who had killed them. Driven by grief and anger, Knuckles rushed towards the Master Emerald, falling right into Finitevus' trap. Knuckles went to gather energy, but was pulled in by Finitevus' hexes, and in an instant, Enerjak was reborn through Knuckles' body, and thanks to the negative chaos energy infused in the Emerald, this new Enerjak was fully subservient to Finitevus, but also reliant on Finitevus for power. As Enerjak, Knuckles unleashed his newfound power, stripping the Dark Legion from their bionic modifications and proving his might as a god. Eventually, Sonic caught up with the conflict, and drawing inspiration from Scourge, he would tap into the Master Emerald to supercharge himself, hoping to level the playing field against Enerjak. However, even in this power-upped version, Sonic still struggled against Knuckles' formidable new form. To make matters worse, he needed ground support from Knuckles' father Locke and his girlfriend/distant cousin Julie Sue. Yes, you heard that right, the Echidna family tree has everybody related to Knuckles, including his future wife. The instant the fight in the sky began between two superpowered beings would be the moment that would push away the last of Finitevus' men, as the Destructics would nope right out of there through a warp ring, and Scourge would dip out with his girlfriend to work on their own nefarious plans. Together with Archimedes, the ground force would launch an all-out assault on Finitevus. Surprisingly, Finitevus was pretty decent at hand-to-hand combat, and he would take on the gang as he prevented them from messing with the Master Emerald. However, as shockingly as it is, every time Enerjak comes up, fire ants end up saving the day, as Finitevus was temporarily taken out of the picture by Archie, who managed to teleport him away. However, breaking Finitevus' curse on the Emerald and saving Knuckles required a grim sacrifice, and it was no easy task. Locke had to give his own life, but he was ready to do so if it meant saving his son. Teary-eyed, he ascended atop the Master Emerald and recited his final chant, and with that, Knuckles was saved. But he would now, thanks to Dr. Finitevus, be the only surviving Guardian left. Finitevus would get back just in time to see this transpire, and it would send Finitevus into a blind fury. However, his range was nothing compared to Knuckles', who had just lost his father because of something that he had done while acting recklessly. Knuckles unleashed his wrath, delivering a brutal beating to Finitevus. Just when it seemed like this villain was finished, Finitevus, however, managed to teleport away, vowing to fight yet another day. After the dust had settled and Knuckles took his place at Angel Island with his friends, Knuckles and Julie Sue would then embark on a desperate mission using the warp rings to hopefully find the location that Finitevus had discarded the Guardians in. However, despite their relentless efforts, the rings refused to cooperate, leaving them unable to reach their desired destination. Frustrated, they found themselves trapped in a seemingly endless loop, unable to uncover the fate of their missing allies and Knuckles' family. Later on, Knuckles received a tip from the Dingoes regarding Finitevus' potential hiding spot. Determined to track him down, Knuckles, along with Mighty and Julie Sue, would set off for Sandopolis. However, while exploring an ancient ruin, they would accidentally trigger a booby trap, plunging them into peril. Meanwhile, however, back in the Master Emerald, the situations were also kind of dire, as Vector and Ray found themselves overwhelmed by a relentless onslaught of flying robots. Thankfully, Julie Sue back in Sandopolis ended up being a bit of a hero, and she managed to get them out of the trap. And although she struggled to disarm it, I really like that she just took out her gun and took care of it with her gun. Also, meanwhile, Ray ended up saving the day back on Angel Island. He would tap into the Master Emerald's energy, channeling the power to scare off the attacking robots by making it seem like he was going to go super, and honestly, he looks really cool here. However, the writers make it clear to us that not everyone can harness the Chaos Emerald's superpowers. Some individuals, like Sonic, are just better attuned to the energy than others, which admittedly is kind of lame. I feel like everybody should have their chance to go super, and it's honestly just a little bit cowardly not to give everybody a super form. While exploring Finitevus' lab, the gang stumbled upon a warp ring which led them to ruins directly below Angel Island, and in a very roundabout way they realized that Finitevus had been literally right under their noses all along. When confronted, Finitevus showcased his agility as he skillfully avoided them, and he took out two of their members with relative ease. However, things became complicated when it came to Knuckles. Knuckles would manage to pin Finitevus, but it wouldn't last for long. He might have succeeded in taking Finitevus down, but there was then an onslaught of giant harpoons which fired at Angel Island and was threatening to pull the island down. To save his home, Knuckles would have no choice but to reluctantly team up with Finitevus, who was in absolutely no way responsible for this, and also the Down Under freedom fighters who just happened to be in the area and showed up at this time. They also revealed they had to replace Bill the Platypus, who after he defected to Eggman, which I promise is important to the story and not just a fun fact about the freedom fighters Down Under. And so, in what might be one of the most obvious twists that I feel anyone could have seen coming from a mile away, Finitevus would soon turn on the Down Under freedom fighters while out with them, and I have to admit, I really enjoy watching him fight. He bounces everyone around using his warp rings, and I feel like it's a really creative way that they've made him just like this really clever villain that allows him to make his foes kind of hit themselves and deal with themselves, and it showcases that he can hold his own with both his brilliance and his brawn. During this chaotic encounter, the Dark Egg Legion, previously known as the Dark Legion, but ended up rebranding themselves after they fell to Eggman, ended up showing up. They overwhelmed Knuckles and his remaining friends, and with the aid of flying robots, everybody was defeated. Honestly, I feel like everybody should have seen this coming a mile away, but to nobody's surprise, Finitevus had teamed up with Bill, and by proxy the Dark Egg Legion, to get Knuckles from the start, and this was all part of his plan. Shocker that the guy who has never helped anyone without having other intentions had malicious intentions here. Basically, Dr. Finitevus had struck a deal with the Dark Egg Legion. They could have Angel Island and the Master Emerald as long as they allowed him to study it further to his heart's content. And honestly, if he succeeded, he would probably use it to screw over the Dark Egg Legion because that's kind of how Finitevus rolls. It wouldn't be long before Knuckles and his friends would break free and a fierce battle erupted on the ground between the Dark Egg Legion and the Down Under Freedom Fighters, alongside with Knuckles' Chaotix. Meanwhile, Knuckles took to the sky for his long-awaited final showdown with Finitevus. Things escalated pretty quickly as Finitevus attempted to broker a deal with Knuckles to avoid fighting. But Knuckles was having none of this, and I love it. He's here for blood, and he unleashes his rage, expressing his deepest desires. He wants to have his father back, and he wants to be able to look his mother in the face again. It's powerful, heart-wrenching, and honestly, I felt it in my gut when I read it for the first time. Fueled by nothing but raw anger, Knuckles just lays into Finitevus, pushing him closer and closer to the edge of the island. However, Finitevus wasn't a pushover, and he began to regain his footing. The two started channeling their own chaos energy, two sides of the same coin, negative and positive, as they powered themselves up to fight each other. I love it so much. As they each chanted their own respective incantations, the tension built to an epic climax, culminating in a massive cracoom as their fists collide. Evenly matched in chaos energy, Finitevus seized the moment after the blast to trap half of Knuckles' body in the warp ring, threatening to cut it in half so that he could just watch Knuckles in a gruesome display be split in two. Thankfully, Julie Sue was there and she saved the day with her trusty gun as she just shot Finitevus, giving Knuckles the chance to escape. And in a fit of rage, Knuckles grabs Finitevus by the cloak and drags him to the side of the island where he would then hurl his body down the edge. And honestly, it feels like such a satisfying conclusion to this really incredible villain. However, it sadly doesn't end here. We would later learn that Finitevus in fact survived the fall. But he may as well be dead, because not long after this, the Super Genesis wave would hit, and it would remove pretty much everything from the universe, including Finitevus. And personally, I like to think that he just perished here. It makes for a more satisfying arc with an actual conclusion. And so that there is the story of Dr. Finitevus. I'm generally curious to hear your thoughts on him. I first covered him almost 3 years ago, which is insane to think about, and it's been a lot of fun returning to give a more in-depth look on him. Considering everything that I've learned over the years, I feel like I've been able to add quite a lot to this video compared to the first one. If you enjoyed this video and you think it deserves a like, a comment, a subscription, or whatever, it would be greatly appreciated. But as always, I'm not your boss, I just hope that you have a good day.